Ever since the return of Dragon Ball in the modern era with the Battle of Gods movie, the realm of many possibilities has been flung wide open for the Dragon Ball universe, and with the creation of the Dragon Ball Super series, it appeared that the potential of Dragon Ball was going to ascend to new heights. Throughout the course of the Dragon Ball franchise, we have seen the story continue to escalate, going from the story of a magical journey between Goku, Bulma, and friends that they gathered along the way to find the Dragon Balls, and now going to a universal tournament in which universes are completely erased from existence. However, there is still room for Dragon Ball Super to grow, and there is still much potential waiting to be scratched beneath the surface. So in this video, we're going to be discussing the potential of Dragon Ball Super and what it can become in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Alright guys, so that's what we're going to be discussing today, what the potential of Dragon Ball Super is, and what it can really become in the future. So joining me today is someone who is a big fan of the Dragon Ball franchise, and you've seen him on my videos in the past, and his name is...
Alrighty guys, it is Kwame here today, also known as Detective Q, and I will say, I really love the Dragon Ball series as a whole.
So with Dragon Ball Super, the current iteration of the Dragon Ball franchise, which is still ongoing in the current universe survival arc, it has really garnered a lot of interest among Dragon Ball fans and has shown that there are still a number of depths and a number of heights that this series can still rise to. So we've talked about this in our various videos in the past, where Super can go from here, and that perhaps there's still a lot of potential for the series to grow. What do you think about this, Detective Q, and where do you think Super can really go from here?
Well, I think as of right now, this is probably the best arc they've had in terms of consistency throughout the entire franchise thus far. And I think that when you compare it to the Future Trunks arc, the Future Trunks arc was very good, but I think one of the problems that it suffered from was the fact that there were a lot of moments where things just came out of nowhere and the ending really dragged down the whole direction of where the story was going. However, so far the Tournament of Power has been very good, and I think that the show has put itself in a situation where they're opening up the floodgates to do a lot of potential things in the future, even if you can't really have an arc as big as this, because they've now introduced so many universes. And I think a good point you brought out months ago, weeks ago, whenever you uploaded it, Mike, was when you talked about the unused universes in the Tournament of Power, when you talked about the 4 universes that were not participating in the fight. And I think that was a very good point, because obviously if they're in the Tournament of Power just to spectate, you have to believe that those universes are going to have some point of the plot in the future, and I think that's definitely going to make it much more interesting going forward to see the actual other universes being involved.
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the things I've really wanted to see since the beginning of Dragon Ball Super, and really since Battle of Gods the movie, exploring all of these other universes, seeing more of these civilizations, learning more about the powers and I guess the heroes and villains respectively that live in these universes. And we got to see a little bit of that in previous arcs, especially in this arc though, even though it wasn't really for a long period of time, especially when it came to like the Pride Troopers and Universe 6. It was a little bit brief, but just those shots of like the main city where we saw Hit and Frost, or the shots I suppose of perhaps Planet Sadal, where we saw Renzo that Kaba went to recruit for the Tournament of Power, and just, you know, seeing that cool bar where we saw Topo hanging out with Casserole, you know, that was just really cool seeing those universes, even though we haven't got to see much. Obviously, our main universe is Universe 7, but, you know, Dragon Ball, to its roots, has been an adventure story, so it'd be really interesting to see more adventures for Goku to go on, maybe learning journeys, you know. It could be really similar to the preparation for the 22nd tournament in Dragon Ball, where we saw Goku going around the world on his training mission that was kind of, you know, he was kind of sent on by Master Roshi. So maybe Whis or Beerus will say, okay, if you ever really want to be as powerful as towards me or be able to challenge gods of destruction, you gotta learn to know their universes and maybe the techniques that are within them. And I think that could certainly open up huge new avenues for Dragon Ball Super to go down.
Right, and I think one of the biggest questions about the Dragon Ball world as a whole, Mike, is that there's often been like an invisible cap as to how strong you think a character can get. Because, you know, prior to Dragon Ball Super, even if you include GT, like we thought that Goku and Vegeta were the strongest outside of, you know, obviously the Shadow Dragons who were competitive with them. And then when you go to Super, it's like, well, Goku's supposedly the strongest guy in the universe, but now Beerus and Whis come out of here, and then, oh, guess what? There's other angels and gods of destruction, and other Supreme Kais and other fighters. So then it like widens this whole gap of how strong you think Goku is. So it's kind of like Goku has to start all over again. You know, it's kind of like Goku has to get to the top, and I think that was the only possible way they could do it. So when you look at Dragon Ball Super, after this Tournament of Power, whoever wins, I wonder who's gonna win the Tournament of Power, I think we're gonna get, you know, a point where it's not gonna just be about power anymore, and the story has to go into a direction where you're trying to solve the problems of other universes, because quite honestly, who else is strong enough to really compete with you other than the gods themselves?
But yeah, one of the things I would have to say is that, you know, Dragon Ball Super has kind of continually introduced characters who can even keep up with Goku at a godly level of Super Saiyan Blue. Like, you know, we had Hit introduced in the first tournament between Universe 6 and 7, and now we have Jiren being introduced. And, you know, we would logically think that the characters from the respective universes that are competing right now are the most powerful from their universes, but again, Quaman, there are all of these different universes that aren't competing right now. Like Universe 1, Universe 12, 5, and 8, these universes that have higher mortal levels and more like controlling gods of destruction and Kaioshin. So that leads me to wonder if perhaps they're gonna have far more powerful civilizations too. Like maybe Goku will travel to one of these universes, like Universe 1 for example, and literally everyone in the universe, you know, their normal average power is gonna be Goku's Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken level or Goku's next form, you know? I think that would be interesting. Now, would it be ridiculous? I mean, probably, but, you know, at least it would make for much further progression to be made in the coming arcs.
Right, and I always believe, my dad often says this in a lot of offhanded fiction, that a hero or the heroes are often defined by the villains that they're around. And one of the biggest questions about the Dragon Ball world is that how much stronger can you make your villains to compete with the characters that we have if they keep progressively getting stronger? And I think what made the future Trunks arc really interesting to me is that they took a godlike character in a Supreme Kai and Zamasu and then mixed him with Goku's body. So it's like, okay, so now we're already at the point where we're using Goku's body as a villain. So I think Super actually has a lot of potential to become creative if they're going to keep up with this increase in power scaling for the main cast, especially, Mike, as we've both recently made in videos, that characters like Master Roshi were able to get leaps and bounds stronger than we ever thought they could get.
In retrospect, it makes me wish that Roshi and Piccolo actually went to fight Zamasu, since both of them knew the Mafuba, but I guess they're not Saiyans, so we have to completely ignore them. You know, like in terms of the power scaling and what can happen next, I mean, if they're gonna try and increase the scale, the only thing I could possibly think of would have to be something like a Crisis on Infinite Earth situation, where there's a being so powerful he can not only take out universes but whole timelines. So Goku and the people from our main timeline have to team up with other counterparts from other timelines, you know, and maybe they could do like a crossover between, you know, the current timeline and perhaps GT if they want to still keep that in the rudder, or maybe they can do a crossover with, like, you know, other timelines we haven't even seen yet, so that all of them can fight against these like ridiculously overpowered foes. Because unless they're gonna tone it down a little bit after this Tournament of Power and we're gonna start to see, like, you know, smaller stories, I feel like if they're gonna really continue with the escalation, it's gonna have to get to that ridiculous level at some point.
I would definitely have to agree with that, Mike, and I do think that we both said this before, that, you know, Dragon Ball has a massive cast of characters but tends to focus the direction continuation of the story on the handful that are really relevant, like Vegeta, Goku, the gods, future Trunks and Gohan, and Piccolo in my dreams.
Broly?
And Kale Broly. But the point is that in discussing these characters, I always feel like Dragon Ball has so much to work with. They don't have to focus on Goku, because what they could do is they can make the story a fighting story, obviously, but they could base it around something that doesn't completely create power. And I think that's where you're gonna have to have a really talented writing staff that can write a story that's not completely dependent on power and abilities, especially if it's a show that's built around that anyways.
I keep hoping that Togashi isn't actually on hiatus. He's writing the further arcs of Dragon Ball Super with Toriyama. But a man can dream. A man can dream. But let us know down below your own thoughts about what you think the potential holds for Dragon Ball Super in the future. Where do you think it can really go from here? And do you think that there's a lot more they can tell with this Dragon Ball universe? Or do you think that maybe it's kind of getting to where it's going to be repetitive? Let us know down below. Check out Detective Q in the description and the end card. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.